Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside Government for the fall 2019 semester here at Cayuga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, and the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as WDWN, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Next week, we start our annual series of candidate forums for those running for office in Cayuga County, including the Cayuga County Legislature, the Auburn City Council, and Mayor of the City of Auburn, and we'll talk a little bit about those at the end of the show. But voters will go to the polls to elect who will represent them on November.
Have to have so many hours each day, starting on Saturday, October 26th.
So what's the earliest somebody can vote and what's the latest somebody can vote?
7 a.m. in the morning and 8 p.m. at night.
And you have 3 sites that you're using?
Yes,
You're only
correct.
required to do 1 though, correct?
That's right.
So you're doing 3 sites, and where are they?
Well, the one in Auburn, in the city of Auburn, is at Clifford Park, the clubhouse at Clifford Park,
Okay.
the old Y field. Most people,
Would normally be used as voting sites, or is the Y Field a voter site? to
it's
start?
not. It has not been, but
Okay.
it's been a newly renovated building. It's a great polling location.
Okay, so, and how about Conquest?
Conquest has been a polling site as well as Venice.
Okay, and so just some general numbers about, and I don't want to get saturated because we're not going to give you any hard math questions.
Good.
So,
That's good.
That's good.
how many voters are there in Cayuga County roughly?
45,000 approximate.
And of that 45,000, is the percentage that are eligible? We're about a $70,000 to $80,000, or 70 to 80,000 people in the county. How many?
Now, the estimates are that only about 70% of our people are registered.
And then how many? Do you have an idea? And I know a presidential year is different than whether there's a real competitive set of races.
Cheryl and I just talked about that today.
Okay.
We had,
And
it's,
in an off-year election, which we call this,
this is a low turnout year.
local elections, a low turnout, about 30%.
So you'll get about 15,000 people throughout the county that'll roughly vote.
Altogether, including election day.
Election day. And
And then, a gubernatorial year, it has historically been around 70.
then are we higher, lower? Are we about mid-range for
Just
Central
about
New York?
mid-range.
For Central New York. And then what's the party breakdown of that 45,000?
In Cayuga County?
4 times, if not more. We'll have a presidential primary,
Right,
gonna have-
that's in April.
state primary
right.
for assembly and assembly.
That's
That's
on
in
the,
June.
that's at the same time as the congressional.
So they have combined
They
that
did
now.
They
combine.
have
Okay.
combined it.
There are 2 primaries and a general, 3.
And what about for local elections? Will that be on that same day?
It'll be on that, if there's a primary for a local, it would
It'll
be
June
held in
22,
June.
we decided.
So I can tell you that this new system of primaries is making my life interesting in those
I'm
over
glad.
here, because we can't interview candidates when they're candidates. And so now the elections almost start in first week of February when people start passing petitions. Has this elongated the process for all of you?
Oh, well, we
In a
don't
good
have,
way or a bad way?
we don't have downtime. We used to.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's a time where you could
right.
start catching up on
Right,
records and
we
all.
also,
We don't
and
have
we also do the school elections for most of the school districts in Cayuga County and a couple of them
Couple that are in
outside.
Cayuga, Onondaga.
So we're,
Why do you do Onondaga?
Well, we do a couple of towns. in
Yeah.
Oh,
Onondaga.
Townsend, okay.
yeah,
all
no, a
right.
couple of
school
school
Where
districts.
there's an
Atlas
overlap of
Scotty
Atlas,
Atlas
okay.
and Jordan Elbridge.
Jordan Elbridge.
So it's just elongated. Now it sounds like a mayor, and I can only speak from perspective, a mayor's race to me should only be about 2 or 3 months. It now can be 9 months. Am I correct on that?
I don't think that's the impact that it's going to have.
Okay, you don't see longer elections.
No.
No, because as a matter of fact, a lot of our candidates decided that maybe a little longer, but not 9 months. I'm going to say they started in June after the primary.
Right.
To start campaigning, where normally it's after the September primary.
Yeah.
So I think
How much does a primary cost the taxpayers local usually?
it varies. If there's a full countywide primary, it's
25,000 for a full.
25,000 or so.
Okay. So I also know, not to make life busy for you this week, people can still register to vote until when?
October 11th.
So next week, next Friday, they can do
Friday.
that. So there's not same-day voting in New York, where you can register and
No.
vote. Say,
No,
You have to be
see that
you have to be registered by the 11th
Do
in
do you
order
see
to vote.
that coming sooner than later?
I don't think there's much of a move toward that in New York. they have changed a few things. They've changed the registration date for changing your party.
So it used to be you'd have to re-register in a party the election before to
Right.
take part in the primary the next
right.
year.
Now they've changed the date to February. You can change parties up to February 14th and be able to vote in the April presidential primary next year.
Oh, so that late this year.
Yeah, the
Wow.
governor just signed that last week.
And there's something also new about portable registration. My assumption is this, from county to county, this has to deal with.
That is creating havoc
Well,
for
explain
our
what.
clerks.
Okay, so explain what that is first.
The motor vehicle department forwards names of people who have come in and changed their voter registration or changed their driver's license. And when they do that, the county gets a notification of whether or not they want to register to vote, and we get the registration from their previous county. And it should transfer seamlessly.
Should.
Should.
So you'll be
Well,
testing that out this month.
Seamless is not a good word for it. We know that.
All right. So what happens if, so you come to, first is 26, about 3 weeks from now, you go 10 a.m. to one of the 3 sites, and you're not in what are these electronic polling books, which we'll get to in a second.
Right.
If you're not there, what happens?
Well, you can.
If you think you're registered.
If you think you're registered, you can do an affidavit ballot, the same as you could do at a regular polling place on election day. The
So it
same.
doesn't go through the machine.
It does
It
not.
doesn't.
It gets held. and
It
it's
gets held
checked.
in an envelope, and we check on the registration. And if it's
If
our
they-
mistake,
Right. we
it'll be
let- we
counted.
Count it, and if it's,
And if in fact that they're not registered, if people are inactive, we can activate them and count the affidavit, register them, and it won't happen again.
So if somebody is inactive and they just haven't voted in how many ever elections,
Yeah.
can they still vote even though they're an inactive?
they can vote on an affidavit ballot, and then the next
And then
election,
they're
they'd be
reactivated.
activated.
Okay.
And the
Is
vote
that
is
the
counted.
majority of what you get
That
when it
is
comes
the
to?
majority.
That is
It's
the-
moved within the county a lot of times.
And how about those who just say, I did register?
They go to, sometimes they will go to court, to one of the
Do
judges.
you get many of those?
We do, but usually
Presidential years.
presidential year.
Because it's going to change the Electoral College in New York? Oh, sorry. Oh,
No,
I'm sorry.
it's
that
not
was
gonna-
sorry.
it's not what you'd call a high-impact change.
Okay, so let's talk about changes you are dealing with. So, the law says that you must have one voting booth, one early voting per county. You've decided because of geography that you're going to go to for three.
Three.
Why go through? Is it just literally the issue of geography that made that decision?
Well, not
but-
totally. I mean, the discussion we had included, aside from the geography, the imbalance of the party registrations in Cayuga County. If you had a voting location in the city of Auburn, there's a considerable
Certainly,
advantage to the
to the
Democratic
Democrats.
Party.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we talked about, and we also talked about money, and I think that frankly, Kate and I were back to one until we realized that we were able to get more money for the other two, which we said, well, if we can, that's great, because we would like to have them.
Do you see this as the dry run for the future, that you'll see how many people go to
Yes.
Conquest or go to Auburn, or
I-
you're not locked into 3 forever?
No,
No.
Okay.
And actually, we're not locked into those 3 locations. If, if there would be a more logical location in the north or south end of the county, nothing is written in stone as far as.
that we have to stay there, it's just,
So for the 5 hours that you'll do on that first Saturday, how many people will it be at each site that you'll have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats?
in the country we will, in Venice and in Conquest.
Yeah.
In the city, we're probably going to have 6 people, just because we do anticipate a few more voters actually using the Yfield site.
Any idea what your traffic, do you have any idea what you think?
Just
your
what they've,
traffic-
no, that's a guess. Some of the people who've done this before in other states have said that after 3 or 4 years, you get up to about 40% of the people who vote early.
Really?
Yeah.
I
That's
think
the,
they've told
that's
us
the
about
number.
10%.
So I asked
now.
that
Yeah,
question
they
because
said 10% the first year
So
is a good
those
guess.
who do not know, you have both been party chairs.
Right.
in some cases multiple times.
True.
You know the issues that go into elections. I find it hard to believe that people aren't going to wait till the last minute to hear get the last mailing, get the last phone call, get the last reminder.
I think you will have the same people who always wait for that. But I do think there's a lot of people.
But if I'm Johnny Jones and I'm going to go vote either straight Democratic or straight Republican, or I have
You're
a
gonna go
friend,
vote.
Yeah,
I'm going to go.
Yeah,
And
go
it's
and candidates are going to try to get people to vote early because it's like money in the bank. You know, they're people that you know are going to support you. You're going to go out and work to try to get them to show up at the polls. And if you know that they've already voted,
It's
I don't
great.
have to
You
worry about
don't
deal
have to
with
worry
them
about
anymore.
them.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we mailed absentee ballots out a week ago on Friday. We already have absentee ballots back. So that's how fast some people vote. Now,
Okay.
others, most of our absentee ballots come in at the end of the month. But I would say we get back a very good percentage within the first week of mailing them out.
Do you think it'll be different for local elections versus, say, a national high profile? Because clearly, I mean, let's just even, not going to get into presidential politics, but you just got to think in a given 3 days of what the top 3 news stories have been on the national level have changed, at least first
Every
and
day they
second, every
change,
day.
right.
So do you think it'll be different in a presidential where people might wait later if they're undecided? Or you think the
I
undecideds
don't
are the
think.
undecided?
I think they're very. You know, by the time you get near election day, there are very few undecideds in a national election.
Okay. So go ahead.
9 days ahead of the election, too, really is not, I mean, when you think about it,
Right.
it's not like voting October 1st. It's
Right.
9 days and
You know, you've seen most of the campaign.
So, or sometimes too much of the campaign.
Well, that's the other thing. You know, if you can get your name, we produce a list every night of the people who have voted early.
Right.
And the candidates have access to it.
that.
So they can quit calling. So
Right.
if you want to stop phone calls, if you want to stop
Or
people from,
concentrate on those you've got to go after.
but if you
resource
don't, but if you
allotment.
want to stop people from calling you, if you want to stop people from
Vote Go
vote.
from vote
right.
early, and
They'll leave you
They'll
alone.
leave you alone.
Yeah, so for us, the only one that we'll miss is you'll start voting before the mayor's forum. That's the last one. We have the DA,
Right.
we were talking about this beforehand. The DA's a
right.
couple days before, and yes, it'll be shown after that, but it will be only the mayor's forum. How do you prevent with this new system double voting, where somebody says, hey, I can go on October 26th and I can go on November 5th?
There are biggest purchase out of this entire thing has been the electronic poll books.
So what is one?
Electronic poll book is going to take the place of the paper books, which we had at every polling spot where people came in, signed.
Oh, the number of trees you will save.
We're saving trees. And if we can get people to vote early, we'll save on printing for ballots also, because we'll cut down on the number we have to order printed.
So
right, when you go to the polling place on early voting day, you go up to the inspector. A laptop will face the inspector. You have the little sign-in pad like you would
Just
at
like a
Wegmans
credit
or
card.
Just like
right,
Wegmans.
exactly.
Okay.
Any credit card pad. And then the only other, I mean, the kit that it comes with, a little kit, is a printer.
So is this wired to all the other systems?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's
All
talk about
connected.
voter security.
Encrypted.
Encrypted.
Everything is
Encrypted.
encrypted.
I've heard about an encryption for now way too much for 5 years now. Okay, so one of the questions has always been, because New York has your voting machines are not wired together. They
They
are
are not.
freestanding.
Freestanding.
So are these poll books? They're not going to be connected to the voting machines. Correct.
Not to the voting machine,
So
no.
the voting machines, from a security point of view, are always going to be freestanding.
They're freestanding and
And you-
nothing, and we're still going to vote on those same machines and and we still have paper ballots.
So you still keep. How long do you keep the paper ballots for?
2 years.
2 years.
Okay. And do you ever go back to them?
We would if there
Just
were,
an absence
we
or
audit.
okay.
We do an audit after the election, and then, if there's any kind of a court challenge,
Katie and I went back to the Owasco ballots 1 year,
yeah,
4
we
or 5
counted
times.
them 5 times.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you to change back and forth in that. So
Yes.
it did. It's, so how many of these electronic poll books did you buy?
45.
Because you have how many sites?
38.
So you
30,
have
well,
a couple.
32, but they're multiple.
So
multiple
have they, I
EDs.
know when I read one of the stories in the Citizen, they hadn't arrived yet. Have they have
They have
arrived?
arrived.
Have you been able to start training poll workers on that?
We've had, very few have been trained. Next Monday, we start all week.
Intensive training.
All week, we have classes.
So I want to ask about poll workers, because I know it's not an easy job. Everyone says, oh, they just show up and they socialize, and,
Oh,
and
no,
candidates bring them
it's-
donuts. And first of all, it's a very long day,
Right,
because
It is.
for an
16
election
hours.
day, it is a long day, because you've
Yeah.
got to be there before 6.
It is.
And you clearly do not end before 10.
Right.
Voting may stop at 9, but you still go on. So you've got a lot of, let's just say, some of your poll workers may
Older.
not be techies.
that's true.
So is it a challenge to get them trained on both the electronic poll
You know-
book and the machine? and the
You know, we
voting machine?
kind of expected that some of our inspectors would not want to work when they found out that it was going to be electronic poll books. But, you know, if you stop and think about it, most people now are familiar with cell phones, or they FaceTime with their grandchildren, or, you know, they're
Or at
not
least
as
their
intimidated.
ear FaceTimes
Yeah,
with, their,
whatever.
with their grandchildren.
Yeah, whatever. So they're, you know, they're not as intimidated by the electronics as they might have been
But they'll
a
all
few
have
years
training
ago.
on all
They're
of
going to have
this.
training on it. And in places where they've had early voting for several years, the inspectors all say that it's easier.
So when I I vote at Lake Avenue for the most part. I know there's usually 3 tables there, and it's A through whatever,
Right.
and then throughout. It sounds like only one poll book
Two.
two per
We're
site.
actually going to put 2 at,
Okay,
in
so-
the
so-
city
In
at
the
most
city.
of the sites.
So your hope is that will speed the process along
right.
for,
Right.
for people as well. What's the cost for these?
$1,200 is what is
For each one.
And who's paying the freight on that?
The grants from the state have picked up the cost for everything that we've needed to get set up for early voting,
So,
including the
Including
cost of the
training,
of the
inspectors. all.
inspectors and everything.
so I want to ask, I know you all had to decide which vendor you were going through, which again, the state of New York tends to micromanage everything in New York. I'm surprised they didn't say this is the vendor you're going to go
Well,
with.
I
They-
think only 3 vendors actually got approved for.
Yeah, they
the
had an
ex-
approval process.
But
and
still, I mean,
they-
the state just basically saying, I mean,
Whichever one
they
you
do
want.
tend to, this
Oh,
is
you're
my
right.
personal
They
opinion.
did that with the voting machines.
Right, this is your choice.
They
Go
went,
purchase.
they went through a process of approval. At the beginning, when we started going to some of the presentations by the companies, we looked at 5 or 6 companies, and out of the 5 or 6 companies that we looked at demonstrations, only 3 eventually were able to sell in New York State.
Okay.
So there was quite a rigorous.
We tried to pick the company by simple measures, simple commands to do certain things on the machine.
And I don't mean this negatively, but this is how I buy a phone. I want it idiot-proof.
Yeah.
I want to be able to dial a number. I want to be able to look up
it-
something up.
You know, when you realize that in New York, the market that most of these companies had to be looking at was the large counties. They're going to look at what Nassau and Suffolk and New York City and Westchester and
Maybe
Buffalo, Monroe, they're all going to be trying to sell to those counties. And they kept putting all these extra features on that larger counties have more of a call for than we do. You know, we don't need to know what the waiting line is in Troop. You know, we've never had a waiting line anywhere that was more than 15
So that sounds like an
minutes.
interesting race out there. So you might have a waiting
Yeah,
line.
yeah,
might have
that's,
an
we might have, that might be the
that
first,
one- that-
first
She
year we
might have
needed to
picked the
know
wrong
that.
one.
I
might
know.
I think I've got it on my mind.
Mine,
because
yes,
I've heard it.
I've heard about that. So, okay, so this is a mandate from the state. The state's covering all the expenses for this. So, are there any out-of-pocket expenses for Cayuga County for early voting at this stage?
Not
No.
at this stage.
And
And into next year, we'll be able to pay for the staffing and if we decide we need a few more.
And then the local
Books.
governments will lobby the state to get more
Continue
money
the
for the
funding.
following.
do you
year.
think that'll occur? That it'll-
I think that this is going to be a popular program. Number one, and I think it's something that's very visible to to the local voters. I think it's the kind of thing that would get get an approval at the state level. The other thing is that if you got 40% of the people voting early, you've got some savings on the election day expenses.
How so? Because you're still going to have the same infrastructure in place, aren't you?
You'll have fewer poll workers if you have fewer people voting on election day.
So
And
you-
you'll also
there's-
print
will you
fewer
be,
ballots.
you'll
will you
print
have
fewer
fewer people
ballots.
this year? Or are you
This year
doing
we'll-
full-
This year we will have fewer people, actually. Next year we know in a
hoping for-
presidential year we'll add more.
We'll have to
So
staff
every
up.
county's getting a different amount. How did they determine 154,000 for Cayuga?
They did, they started with the capital grant, which was for purchasing the poll books and hardware, was 15,000 per site.
Okay, so if you had a site.
So if you had 3 sites, that's how we gained, you know,
Okay.
and then the rest of it was by registered voters statewide. They just took each county and parceled out the rest of it according to number of registered voters.
So a month and a half ago, about a month and a half ago, there was a little bit of question whether you were getting your amount.
Right,
The local.
There was a dispute between the State Board of Elections and the State Budget Office, correct?
that's right.
Right.
Has that been cleared up?
That's all
Yes.
cleared up.
And have you is the money starting to flow to counties?
The contracts have come in, and we have filled out our part of it and sent it back in, and should be all set to submit the bills.
We're
We've
actually
been-
ready to bill
yeah,
for some of
yeah,
our
right now
equipment.
we've been paying. The county has been paying up front,
So,
and we'll get reimbursed. And they seem to think the money's going to, come through quickly.
so you got just a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. What big picture items? What's your biggest worry about early voting? Is it-
Connectivity.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great. So I know where you live. So dial up you're in southern Cayuga County. For those who
That's
don't
right.
know the geography, not exactly the most speediest connections in the world. So how are you overcoming that?
But
Well,
that's not an
And
area.
actually, that wasn't an area we ever tried.
Oh.
Really
That's not a
seriously. We went out to Venice the other day, but Conquest is an area.
Oh,
We
okay.
just have to buy more. To boil it
Routers.
down, Katie and I just
So you now have become IT experts.
We
No.
are.
we're
this
never
is-
going to be IT experts.
This is not our
Can you
thing.
get my cable working? Okay, that's what I want to
You
know.
need a 12-year-old.
Yes.
They know how
I
to
don't.
do
My
that.
the 6-year-old's not doing it. 7-year-old's not doing
We're
it.
buying Cradle points. We understand now that
So,
are more
okay,
powerful routers than.
So that is
That's-
an
that's
issue
the
for.
answer.
Oh, that is an
Okay,
issue in
it
Cayuga
is. So
County.
We,
yes.
do you think that will be the biggest challenge that day?
I
yeah,
really
we've
do
got
believe it will
problems
be.
in about 4 or 5 towns that are
Niles,
questionable.
Sempronius, Victory. I mean, they're over
Moravia.
the county. They're spread over.
So I mentioned your poll workers. Are you always Are you still recruiting? Do you still need poll workers for
We
this?
always need poll
Always
workers.
need poll workers.
So how does somebody apply?
It's online. There's
On
at
our
the
board
board
election site.
Go to
So
the
there's still
county.
time if you're going to do
Oh,
training
yes.
next week. You
Absolutely.
still need people for whether these 9 sites would start on
And
Saturday,
we
October
need them
22nd.
for that, and we need
Yeah,
them for
General
general
election.
election day.
People get sick on us. I mean, that just happens. So we need.
Right now, we're pretty well staffed up, we think. We've got
But
people scheduled
we'll
for
have,
classes.
We'll have
but,
openings.
families have emergencies, people go away.
Right. So how long have you both been? You've been party chairs for a while. You were party chairs a while ago. How long have you both been commissioners?
I've been there 15 years this year.
And you're not sure.
Katie's been there 12.
So, okay.
She knows.
Let me guess. She does.
She's keeping track of
Been
things.
12 wonderful years.
That's her job. She's supposed to watch me. I'm supposed to watch her.
I asked this for quite a reason. I'm not sure what it was anymore, but is there something the state hasn't done when it comes to elections, whether it's election security or election reforms, that you think they have missed the boat on?
Well, quite honestly, if I had my druthers, I would mail out a ballot to everybody and have them mail it back in and forget about going to the polls. That's the way they do it in Oregon, and they get, 90% participation.
If we were having a drinking game, you could have drunk twice with the state of Oregon. So, okay. So is there something they haven't done when it comes to voter security that you're worried about?
No, I think they've been very.
They're really on
prudent
top
on
of
that,
it.
I really
we've
do.
had calls from the FBI and from the state people, and
Why are
they're
you getting
checking
calls?
everything.
They are. And so how big a staff do you have as an office?
Teeny weeny little staff.
We have 2 full-time deputies. Kate and I are part-time, and then we have 2 part-time clerks.
So a very small office to run.
Very small
run this.
office.
And is there anything that the state has done that they've overreached on? Forget the money issue for a second. Is there anything they've overreached on?
I think that, well, I don't know as it's an overreach. I think that if they could have been quicker with their approval of companies and we could have had more lead time to get
That would have been helpful.
to get equipment
Would have
in,
been
it would have
very
been helpful.
helpful.
But aside from that, you know, it was passed in early January, so it couldn't have been much faster. And it's good that we're doing this in a local year when we'll be dealing with, you know,
Smaller
lesser
bites
crowd
and bite-sized elections.
and yeah, and you know, we've got 8 towns where there are no local contests this year, so that'll cut down on numbers also.
So early voting starts on Saturday, October 26th, about 3 weeks from now. People can go to the polls. They can go on your website to find out where the sites are in Venice, Conquest, and Clifford Field or the
And the sample ballots are also on our website.
And they're all ready to go
Tomorrow
as
they'll
well.
be.
They're on now. They were
Okay.
just
Oh,
as we
perfect.
when we left the office.
All right.
Perfect.
We want to thank Cayuga County Board of Elections Commissioners, Katie Lacey and Cheryl Harry, for not only suggesting the show, but coming on to say it's a good idea for a show, but we'll do it. We appreciate that. We'll return in just a moment with another edition of Beyond the Front Page with Gino Albarisi and his son Jeff, a teacher with the Auburn Large School District, to discuss their family leading this year's United Way campaign, as well as Cayuga County United Way Executive Director Karen Macier to talk about this year's campaign. We change gears come Tuesday. We start our series of 7 forums for offices in Cayuga County, including the Cayuga County Legislature, the Auburn City Council, and the race for mayor. On Tuesday, October 8th, will be the race for Cayuga County Legislative District 8. That's a rematch with incumbent Joseph DeForest, a Democrat, and Hans Petcher, a Republican, followed on Thursday, October 10th, with a face-off between Republican Edward Darrow and Democrat Heidi Nightingale for the open seat being created in the 10th District by legislator Joseph Bennett, who is not seeking re-election. That is the northwest corner of the city of Auburn. I'll moderate the forums that are co-sponsored with the Citizen, and the questions will be asked, as usual, by Executive Editor of the Citizen, Jeremy Boyer. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can always send your ideas and thoughts for guests or shows for Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page to cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College. We want to thank you for watching. We hope you stick around for United Way in just a moment.